Thank you very much, Koen. Let me just introduce very briefly. Koen Nomden is one of the leading persons, let's say, of the process of EQF implementation. Koen is a head of sector in the unit skills and qualifications of the Directorate General Employment in the European Commission. I'm using very short just definitions. And Koen is then the, let's say, engine motor of all the processes related with governance, with also organization of the advisory group meetings, content, reports that are a fundamental part of the working of the European qualifications framework. Koen is going to be presenting then on EDCL jointly with Ildiko Mazar. Ildiko has been very active for a number of years, also in the context of not only EDCL, but also qualifications database. So she has this technical part very strong and a lot of experience in this domain. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eduarda. I hope you can hear me. Can you confirm that? Okay, good.
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, no, thank you very much. And I was already listening into the meeting, and I must say, dear colleagues, that I really enjoyed the discussion. So I'm really happy to be in your meeting. And this morning, of course, it's always nicer to be.
You muted yourself, Koen.
Apologies, we cannot hear you anymore.
Okay, sorry, I made a wrong manipulation. I think it's now good again.
It's good.
Thank you. I just have one logistical question. Shall I share slides or will you do it? Okay, Erika's doing it. That is excellent for me. So you can now, so we will talk, Ildiko and myself, about European digital credentials for learning. This is about digital credentials. It is not necessarily about digital skills, because you can have digital credentials for any type of skill or for any type of qualification, of course. We will do our session, let's say, in two parts. So I will give you an introductory presentation, which I hope is not too complex. And then Ildiko will demonstrate more practically how our infrastructure for European digital credentials for learning is working. So we can now move to the next slide. Why are we working on digital credentials? Yeah, this is because in most countries still qualifications and degrees are issued on paper. That has huge disadvantages. And in terms also, you know, if you lose a document, those documents can be more easily falsified, so they are not so tamper-proof. And yeah, they are quite difficult, and it takes quite some time also for their receivers, like employers or recognition bodies, to understand the papers. Now, the aims of digital credentials for learning are also have to be seen a bit more widely. They are part of the idea also to create really a skills data space. They help to remove barriers to recognition, and the work we do on the European level is, of course, I mean, yeah, you can on the global level, there is, of course, the Groningen Network Declaration that aims to do the same thing, achieve a better understanding of how things are going. And we also want to avoid market fragmentation. That is why we work on the European level to make sure that if individual countries work on digital credentialing, that they do this at best in a coordinated way. And for this, we are creating European standards. I hope it works with the arrows on my computer to move the slides, but I have the impression that it doesn't work. because I move I push on my arrows, but it doesn't seem to move a lot on the screen. So can I perhaps ask to go to the next slide? I don't know whether you gave me the necessary access rights. Yeah, so in a European context, we also work on this topic, and it's actually a bit the same in Africa, because we have a situation of multilingualism, and you have that as well. And we have been working on an infrastructure that is multilingual. This is very important. Then a key issue also is user ownership of digital credentials. You give the power to the learner. The learner is the owner of the learning, of course, of the credential, and can use also the credential according to his or her wishes. So we are here in the paradigm of self-sovereign identity. And then, of course, we also talk about trust in the context of digital credentials. And accreditation plays an important role. And of course, also transparency is a key word, because through digitalization, you can make qualifications more transparent to receivers of qualifications. Okay, this work that we do on digital credentials for learning is not done in isolation. Yeah, it is part of a broader policy framework. Recently, the Council, I have to say, the Council of the European Union, which means the member states of the European Union, adopted Council recommendations on micro-credentials, where they also are setting standard elements for micro-credentials and common principles. This was done in June of this year. On the same day, also, the Council adopted a recommendation on individual learning accounts. There is other policy around digital education. There is a digital education action plan that also announces work on digital credentialing. There is the European education area work towards that. So to be achieved by 2025 is ongoing. There is a European skills agenda that referred to work on digital credentialing. And there is a Europass decision and the European data strategy. So you see a whole bunch of policy areas in which the work on digital credentialing is fitting. If we move to the next one now, a basic question is, why digital credentials for learning? Now, first of all, why do I talk about digital credentials for learning? Because you can have digital credentials in many different fields. It's not just learning. You can also have digital credentials in the fields of health, in the field of payment, in the field of travel. So from the education and training world, okay, we often tend to think, and we understand a bit what is meant by credential, but it's a broader term than education alone. And that's why we talk now about digital credentials for learning. Now, these have benefits compared to paper certificates for citizens, for the learner. I mean, they allow, for example, to build an online portfolio to track their learning. So it supports really lifelong learning. They can, of course, use these credentials to apply for a job or to further learning, to further studies, to training. And they can also have their credentials verified at any point. And we will come to this a bit later. Then learning organizations, including education and training providers, they can, of course, build digital credentials. They can, if they apply this as a standard process of issuing credentials, in the longer term, they can reduce cost after initial investment. So that makes it attractive also for education and training institutions. And they can also, if everybody is doing this, more easily understand qualifications from other countries, including other member states. And you must understand, in the context of the EU, 27 member states and a couple of other countries in the process, there we have free movement of learners, we have free movement of workers in a multilingual setting. And we believe that digital credentialing can really make it much easier to understand qualifications of somebody, whether applying for another country for work or also for learning. Then employers can, of course, reduce time and cost of processing applications, and they can also better understand credentials from other countries where they don't know so much the qualifications. And thirdly, they can check, and we will demonstrate how that works, they can check the authenticity of the credential that is presented to them, because we have infrastructure that includes a verification function automatically when you open a credential issued through the system. Now I move on. I don't manage to get control of the presentation. So thanks really for forwarding. There are not so many slides. Now, what is important is that this work on European digital credentials for learning relates to credentials. So it is about credentials. It's not about what we call qualifications, because it's broader. So it covers qualifications, but also other learning achievements. It can cover activities like participation in classes, participation in learning events. Even we could give you a credential for your participation in the meeting these days. Also, it can be used for assessments like transcript of records, and also for entitlements like the right to enroll in a certain course or the right to exercise a certain profession. EDC tries and aims at covering the broad range of learning credentials. Now we can move now on. And when we talk about a European digital credential for learning, what do we mean exactly by that? Now, you can look at digital credentials as covering two different things. On the one hand, the content, learning outcomes, skills, description of the activities. So really, what is the learning about? And then next to that, the envelope. And there you see the identity element. So the person, but also the identity of the institution. There is also the authentication. There is also the delivery policies. So the security aspects are there. What we have been doing in European digital credentials for learning is to cover both and to have data-rich credentials. Yeah. Now, a European digital credential for learning is actually a claim related to the learning achievement of a person. And thus, it creates a link between that person, an awarding body, so mostly an educational institution, and a learning achievement, for example, a qualification of a certain level with a certain context and with a certain content. And usually European digital credentials are, they also include the learning outcomes, for example. So it consists of data. It's not just a PDF document that replaces a paper file. It's really data, but not just data, it's structured data in accordance with a particular data model, a data structure. And this is the European learning model. And this device, the European learning model, allows us, or we hope, and we are in discussions with several actors, but the purpose is that this should be the standard data structure at European level for learning. And this makes the interoperability and the understanding across Europe and not just in the country where the qualification was issued. In terms of security, the digital credentials comply with the international standards of verifiable credentials, and they are tamper-proof and secure. And they are also compliant with what is called the General Data Protection Regulation, an EU regulation that regulates an EU law, basically that regulates data protection. So it's fully compliant with the requirements of that law. And in order to issue them, and we will also come back a bit to that, you need an e-seal. And this means an e-seal, that a seal for a qualification, for a credential that is in line with the EU regulation on digital seals. I come back to that. We can move to the next slide. So in order to implement the idea of European digital credentials for learning, we have been setting up an infrastructure that has several functions. So that allows to issue credentials and of course also to send them to their owners by the body issuing the credentials. Then we have a possibility to store credentials in a wallet, an online or offline wallet. Here, the self-sovereign identity comes in. This is up to each individual. Then thirdly, another crucial function is the verification function. So there is, when you open to see an EDC credential, when you open it, you immediately get information about the authenticity and the validity of the credential. And finally, you can easily share the credential with any other person or organization with just one click. So this is the benefit of the learner when the learner applies for a job and so on. Now, a little word about the e-seal, and Ildiko will also refer to it. An e-seal guarantees the origin and integrity of a document, and the e-seal can be done by an awarding body or by a sealing organization. So this is crucial in the context. So this is indeed an internal EU thing, because it's only within the EU that the eIDAS legislation does, of course, apply. Now we can move to the next one. For more the technical people among you, I mean, we are developing a fully fledged infrastructure that is compatible with the international standards of verifiable credentials. We have quite advanced. I think we have a new learning model, the European learning model. We have already that in place, but the new version 3.0, that should be our stable version. That is will also be published on GitHub, so can be consulted and will be open source. That will be available early next year, but we have an operational system already, and we are working on a few elements that we are still missing, namely an archive wallet for awarding bodies issuing credentials, also a revocation list, and re-signing service and so on. But let's move on there. This is you will get the slides anyway. I would like to point to the importance of the data model that I already referred to. A data model is an abstract data scheme that organizes elements of data, and also such scheme standardizes how these data relate to each other and how they relate to the properties of real world entities. Now, this sounds very abstract, but in concrete terms, it means that we have to agree on how we refer to, I don't know, learning outcomes, or how do we address the title of a qualification, description, and so on. And interoperability in this context means that every country uses the same terms to describe the same things. And for this, we have developed the European learning model, by the way, very much based on the recommendation for the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning. Let's move on. So, as I said, I referred to the EQF, and I would like to draw to recital 24 of that recommendation, which says that the use of common data structures and common data formats would facilitate the understanding and use of published information on qualifications. So that is really the key to this, and for having this work at European level, so that we have information about qualifications, about courses, about credentials that is understood not just in the country itself, but also beyond. And of course, qualifications will usually be in one language, or sometimes information is published in English as well. But the data structures and the terms that we have in the data model are translated in all 29 languages that are concerned by digital credentials for learning. And that, of course, includes languages that you also use in Africa. So we have a single data model that is used for different applications. This is used for information on qualifications that is shared. So then we talk about the qualifications register. This is information about courses also. So member states are invited to share information on learning opportunities with the European level. Also, that should follow the data model. Then also the digital credentials need to follow that data model. And we are now discussing with other EU services to use that data model, for everything that relates a bit to learning. Now, you have to understand, and you are aware that this is all a new development, because I think 3 or 4 years ago, we would not have talked so much about digital credentialing as we do now. Next slide. So the European learning model includes 250 properties currently to describe organizations, to describe details of the credential owner, to describe achievements, activities, entitlements. So the data model is available on GitHub for those interested. We can perhaps share with you the link in the chat at least, and then this could perhaps be transmitted to the participants who are on location. The new learning model will have more than 400 properties, and we have been working lately with our colleagues who are in charge of another learning model, namely called ELMO, which is a learning model used in the field of higher education. And we are making the European learning model fully compatible with that model on higher education, so that in the longer term, and I would say as from next year, we have de facto a single data model, a single data structure. And this is of great benefits to all learners. And we think also, by the way, that also a bit more globally, this can, of course, serve. Then areas of adoption. Now you can move on. Our system is operational. So we have several countries that use it to issue qualifications. Croatia has been doing that. Luxembourg is issuing VET qualifications. We have a number of other countries with whom we are discussing. It also can play a real role in, improving the recognition of qualifications, because it makes it so much easier. You don't have the work of checking authenticity of paper documents, for example. So there is a couple of projects working on that. Also, Malta, smallest member state of the EU, is issuing transcripts of records. The European, the Erasmus network, so it's an association of students who went on student mobility within Europe. They already use it in order to give certificates to their learners who did follow non-formal learning. And we also have vendors. So those are usually private organizations that develop interoperable credentialing products, solutions that they also sell to parties. They also are making use of the European learning model, because the European learning model is a European semantic standard. Now, if we can now move on, and I think we have now come to the end of my presentation.